So your academic career focused on stem cell biology. Can you talk about where you see stem cell therapies going?
Sure. So I think that stem cell biology has two roles to play, one outside of neuroscience and one within neuroscience. Um, Outside of neuroscience, I think that what we're seeing already from companies working on CRISPR and um, you know, chimeric antigen T cell receptors and similar things is that the bone marrow transplants generally and genetic engineering even more broadly are incredible tools to change our genes in specifically designed and engineered ways to fight specific diseases. And that can be diseases we inherit, diseases that we acquire, like cancer. And so just the ability to modify the way that our cells work, since our cells are such powerful tools, and especially in the case of the blood system, our immune cells, I think that's a huge role that stem cell biology is already playing in medicine. In the neuroscience context, I think that we have a whole number of other stem cell approaches that are kind of coming into their own. And these are mostly organ-specific stem cells. So this means like bladder, colon, skin, blood also relevant here, even neural stem cells. And this idea of being able to grow and replace pieces or whole cloth, entire damaged organs, is such a powerful idea. And it seems like we're able to do it, especially for certain, let's call them simpler organs like bladders, trachea, that have shown excellent results in the clinic so far. And initially, this is for people with like very severe conditions, not just for like people that are getting old and say like, oh, well, I've been using my trachea for 80 years, I should get a new trachea now. Instead, it's people who have severe damage in these things. But I think that this trend is going to be relevant extremely relevant for neuroscience, but it's kind of a next wave sort of relevance. Because stem cell biology is incredibly challenging and tissue engineering type approaches are so tough that we're going to see them developed bit by bit the way that they've been making progress. And it's been amazing progress, moving quite fast, but quite fast still means many years, right? As we get it right and then perfect the technology and make it broadly safe and applicable to lots of people. And so I see neuroscience as using these stem cell therapies after the healthcare system generally switches over to this idea of we should replace or treat diseases, or replace tissues or treat diseases before they start breaking down. And for that, we have to have very, very safe, routine, effective organ rejuvenation therapies. And whether that's replacing organs whole cloth with tissue engineering approaches, or there have been interesting ones that have been published quite recently relating to like the reprogramming of cells or the rejuvenation of stem cells inside the body, which, I mean, it's yet to be seen, but I also think that those therapies may have a role to play in this. That in my mind is like second wave neuroscience approaches, but is among the first wave of things that seem to be ready to jump from lab bench to clinic now, that groups like Apollo are fascinated by in our investing world.
What are some of the barriers besides regulation and insurance structures not being a good fit for stem cell and reprogramming therapies?
Yeah, so I think that stem cell therapies are worth discussing slightly separately from a regulatory standpoint, because there is still a big regulatory hurdle that some but not all stem cell therapies have made, which is the fact that if you're a regulator, how do you deal with the fact that every single cell you take out of a person, grow in a lab, and put back into a person is really behaves like a different drug, right? It's not like you're manufacturing the same lot of pills all in a factory and then giving one pill to each person. You're taking their specific cells, growing them up and putting them back into that person, or taking an iPS cell line and putting it into that person. And so one of the big issues that the stem cell world is grappling with right now is the autologous versus allogeneic debate. Autologous meaning, how do we regulate stem cells that come from a person and are modified outside the body and go back into that person, which has specific regulatory challenges, versus the allogeneic approach, which is we have a line of cells that we can then grow up, is quite uniform, can be looked at and regulated like a drug, so it has less regulatory problems. But when you try to play a catch-all solution in cellular biology, and you try to put those cells into multiple people, then you have all sorts of scientific problems, like immune responses and so on and so on. And so there's this scientific and regulatory push-pull on how can we keep therapies safe and effective for patients in a way that we ensure the highest quality, and ensure that what we're doing actually works for that patient. And then on the second hand, how do we build something that is scientifically really, really going to have the effect that we want? So that jumps to the next problem, which is how do you measure efficacy in stem cell therapies? And I think that the field is tainted a little bit because a lot of early people that were doing human clinical trials in what they called the stem cell field then did this in a very much wrong way, where because of this autologous allogeneic push-pull, there were a lot of clinical trials designed without substantial enough scientific thresholds to show true efficacy, which, I mean, don't get me wrong, is an incredibly complicated question because you're modifying entire organ systems, not just individual molecular pathways, right? And so because of these very, very challenging clinical trials that were set up and then showed middling results, it kind of has polluted the water a bit for follow-on stem cell therapies. And so I think that the strategy piece of this, how do you design and execute something that will go after a much needed target in a way that can really help patients in a quantifiable way that makes sense to regulators, is not at all a straightforward problem. The only other piece I would mention as far as like major challenges in stem cell therapies is that compared to manufacturing aspirin, putting it in a pill and sending it out to pharmacies, the cost of stem cell therapies is astronomically high by comparison, right? And that should be obvious. It's so much work to do each individual patient, and so many things can go wrong when you're dealing with biology as opposed to chemistry, that the companies that are really trying to move this to a mega scale and industrialize the delivery of stem cell therapies have enormous cost challenges that they have to deal with, because they want to try to keep the cost of the therapies as low as possible while still making enough money to pay for the years and years of R&D that came before, and clinical trials and so on that came before launching the drug, and also to fund their work on the next more improved version and the next more improved version, while also giving some kind of financial return to their investors who took 20 years of patience and risk in developing that drug. And so that cost piece is a very big challenge. And we've seen some innovative therapies, especially on the gene therapy side, struggle with this already, where the initial price tags have been so high that it's caused some backlash.
Are these problems specific to tissue engineering approaches? Would reprogramming strategies be able to dodge them?
I think that with reprogramming, it depends on how you would approach it. It really depends on the therapeutic actor. So you get around some of the problems no matter what, because no matter, like, if you use a virus or a small molecule or a cocktail of molecules to do your reprogramming approach, lipid nanoparticles with a plasmid inside to modify the DNA, those sorts of things are all cheaper than trying to grow new organs whole cloth outside of the body for every patient. And so you end up with less cost problems there. But as we've seen from the gene therapy space, there are still major issues on the cost side, simply because doing this in the right way, and I think in the reprogramming world, you're definitely going to run into this, because there's a very serious concern for an expected side effect, which is the creation of teratomas within tissues. And so the bar for safety on a reprogramming therapy is going to have to be set so incredibly high that we'll have to just be very, very, very careful and thorough in assessing assessing any putative reprogramming agent as we move to clinical trials in humans.